From the beginning of the human tradition, human beings have sought to be free. They have sought release from slavery to their own ignorance, from servitude to despotic rulers, and gradually, unfortunately, they have sought freedom from proper and reasonable responsibilities and obligations. Freedom is a very difficult condition to maintain. It must be earned with great diligence and protected with continual watchfulness. For we are not only in danger of losing our political, cultural freedoms, but most of all, we are in danger of coming under slavery to some fragment of our own natures. No individual who is not integrated can be free. But we have come so often to think of freedom merely as the enslavement of our bodies that we have overlooked the long and astutely maintained campaigns of autocracy which seek to enslave our minds, our hearts, our wills, and our purposes. Very often, slavery in these more subtle forms is presented in a manner which wins our confidence and causes us to renounce our own liberties through lack of clear thinking or full appreciation of the values involved. Plato pointed out that political freedom is the most difficult of all types of government to maintain, for it must be supported by an enlightened proletariat, a group of persons who can support freedom because he has overcome excess within his own nature. And as we live from day to day in our modern kind of world, we have been inclined to take rather superficial attitudes, particularly as these relate to freedom and responsibility. As more concerned philosophical folks, we must restore values and seek to place our lives upon secure foundations. Each individual desires to have a good life, a useful life, and a happy one. Such desires are right and proper, and we are often asked for some simple panacea by which the individual can attain these most desirable ends. There is no royal road to self-achievement. It is utterly impossible to give to the individual some magic key, formula, or device by means of which he can transform himself. Any such apparent device can be only at best an auto-hypnotic factor, having a short duration, but causing the individual to lose more of reality than he gains. For if he comes under delusions, even though these may gratify him, he departs still further from his proper objectives. The young child learning to play the piano is subject to a terrible initial frustration. To him it is apparently impossible to ever get his two hands to work together, particularly as each hand must have a complete and separate function. You cannot explain to any person how to do this. You cannot give him any method by means of which he can suddenly gain such proficiency. You can tell him only one thing, and that is that by practice, by proper teaching, by endurance, continuance, and patience, he will, in the course of a reasonable length of time, attain the proficiency which he desires, or that degree of which he is capable of attaining. After several years, perhaps, he discovers that his hands will obey these most subtle impulses of his mind, and gradually, as his virtuosity increases, he becomes proficient. This he expects, and unless he is willing to be faithful in his studies and in his practice, he realizes that he must fail. So knowing that others have gone this road before him, and that all who seek the thing which he seeks must do the same, he has a reasonable degree of contentment if his heart is in the project. Now the same is true in the integration of the individual. He must realize that to bring himself into an ordered life is no less an achievement than learning to play a piano masterfully and adequately. If he is willing to spend years in steady practice, in patient strengthening of his abilities, in order that he may be a physician, a lawyer, an engineer, if he is willing to devote time and thought to establishing his economic security in this world, he must realize that the attainment of his philosophical security is no less a task. It will not happen by accident. It will not result from a miracle. Growth in all things must be earned by performing such actions as are necessary to that growth. In this way, if we approach our inner lives, and will recover from this peculiar blindness which seems to cause us to believe that we must win our outer career, but that our inner career will take care of itself. If we will recognize that our faculties, our aptitudes, our values can be disciplined, must be ordered, and that we must devote the time and effort necessary to these attainments, or else we must expect the haphazard existence with its uncertainties, its confusion, and its conflicts. In the same way, we must take particular values with which we are concerned and give them their rightful thoughtfulness and attention. And we must perhaps begin with our concept of freedom. Freedom requires as much as it gives. And there are times when we wonder whether freedom is worth its own cost. We wonder this because we observe that so-called free peoples have not found this freedom bringing with it any lessening of their labors. If as slaves they worked 8 hours a day, they will as free men work 12 hours. The difference lies in the fact that the free man feels that he works according to his own convictions and according to the development of his own nature and character. He is free only in the sense that he is capable of self-determinism, and in this way restores the leadership of his life to himself. This important psychological strength will frequently cause him to make great sacrifice in order that he may do as he pleases. The next and even more important question is, what does he please to do? More persons have won freedom to waste it than perhaps any other pursuit in life. We sought for many years to improve the conditions of the working peoples of our country. We wanted them to have greater freedom and greater opportunity. We provided both, but we could not provide the incentive for the right use of these newly won liberties and opportunities. Therefore, in many instances, this freedom became the basis of further trouble, responsibility of another kind, and the individual discovered that the administration of leisure is more difficult than the management of labor. These things cause thoughtfulness, and of course, actually, the purpose of life is that experience shall continuously provoke us to thoughtful consideration of our own actions. Everything that happens to us tells us something about ourselves, about the way in which we can meet problems, about the weaknesses by which we are not able to attain all of the good things we want. Whenever, therefore, our life is in an impasse, it is telling us of a feebleness in ourselves, of a lack of adequate preparation or reserve with which to meet the changing patterns of our living. Freedom we cherish. We have made a fetish of the word, but we have not yet recognized or accepted the peculiar and strange burden which it brings. Let us think then in the abstract of freedom for a moment. We live in a world of law and order. We live in a universe which moves upon great archetypal patterns. Whether we wish to regard this universe as under the management of a personal deity or under the administration of an impersonal principle, we know that life has its rules. The suns, planets, creatures, all must obey these rules, finding their lives through obedience and destroying their lives through disobedience. In this universe, then, what does freedom really mean? It does not mean that we can do anything that we want to do. It means, rather, that we have a power of choice over certain things that we can do. We also learn gradually that freedom without thoughtfulness may cause us to come into conflict with the great universal patterns around us. These patterns have moved also into our own natures, and in his inward life man is bound to the universe and is dependent upon the same sources of energy and must obey the same laws as all other creatures and forms of life. We learn by degrees that thoughtless liberty must nearly always result in a disaster of some kind. In our unthinking pursuit of the power to do as we please, we simply overlook the rules by which the game of life must be played. These rules are as exact as those of business or of sport. And the individual who disregards the rules gains not freedom but punishment. Thus our life philosophy must begin by some consideration in our own nature of the plan in which we exist. If we do not have some comprehension of this plan, we certainly cannot choose to obey it. There's been a great deal of thought about this matter of obedience and disobedience and indifference to natural law down through the ages. Religion came head-on into this problem at an early time. Christianity solved this with the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, the philosophy of limited determinism. Aquinas was quite convinced that in a world ruled by a wise God, total freedom could not exist. The individual cannot transcend the universal law upon which his very existence depends. He cannot transgress the will of God with impunity. More recently, men have come to question whether God exists, and certainly whether he has a will. But where there is doubt on this matter, another situation has become apparent, especially through science. Namely, that we live in a universe of exactitudes. How we wish to explain these exactitudes is up to our own thinking, but we cannot explain them away. It becomes obvious every day that this universe is a mathematical formula. As Plato said, God geometrizes. Whatever be the force, power, intellect, or energy at the root of existence, this is an autocratic thing which will not permit disobedience to itself. A certain type of humanist and behaviorist takes the attitude that the belief in universal law is itself an illusion. The universe has no law, and that therefore man has infinite opportunity to do anything he pleases, any time he pleases. Such a philosophy is very difficult to maintain so long as we are confronted by a pattern of occurrences around us which we cannot transcend. We may do anything we please, but we cannot change day into night or night into day successfully, nor can we prevent the motion of the seasons. And even if through our skill we were able to compensate to a degree, we would still be in the presence of vast magnetic forces operating in space, which have decreed seasons. If we destroy their pattern, they will simply re-emphasize this pattern in another way. We cannot escape totally from the universe which is our environment, and the ways of the universe, which are the laws for the creatures existing within it. Aquinas, therefore, says, where does free will actually begin? Free will begins as an internal experience of man. It is his ability to make certain choices within the field of his aptitudes and of his knowledge. Man of 1,000 years ago could not choose subjects and objects and purposes not then known, but which perhaps we know today. Nor can we choose activities which will not be discovered for another 1,000 years. We must therefore live within the range or radius of the known. We must choose in relationship to what can be chosen. And by degrees we experience the fact that every choice we make has a consequence. And that if we choose wisely, we gain certain benefits. If we choose unwisely, we subject ourselves to certain retributional processes. To deny such procedure is only to deny things obvious and evident, or attempt to explain away the very changes that are taking place within ourselves. We may choose to live 500 years, but we will be fortunate if we live to be 80 or 85 years of age. We may choose to follow certain professions and trades, but increasing responsibilities and shifting patterns of society may force us into other lines of activity. If we remain adamant to our choice, we merely impoverish ourselves and ultimately suffer from lack of ability to adjust to the inevitables which are continuously operating around us. If adjustment to these inevitables must lead to tragedy, we would have a strong case against universal judgment and universal justice. Actually, however, the inevitables which surround man are essentially benign. They seem to conspire rather for his good than for his hurt. Obedience to inevitables has seldom made the individual less, and has almost constantly made him more. Obedience is in some way a greater virtue, a stronger personal character-forming trait than disobedience. And the person who, understanding, clarifying his way of life, adjusts himself naturally and easily and graciously to the necessities of the time, has the better life, the better health, the greater probability of security and interior serenity. We are speaking primarily, of course, of man's adjustment to a natural world. We do find, of course, in our living, that human society, arising from a confusion of concepts, frequently becomes extremely difficult. And the individual wonders if it is necessary for him to compromise his values in order to adjust to social usages which he does not respect or regard as proper and adequate. Nature itself gives us no example of compromise, but it does give us numerous examples of constructive adjustment. Nature does not apparently require that any creature shall be false to itself. It does not demand that we transgress nature in order to please man. In fact, it tells us that if we do this, men will reward us and nature will punish us at the same time. No matter what the motivation may be, nature will not reward that which is contrary to its own essential plan, even though man may applaud disobedience and honor the individual who believes or thinks that he can break faith with nature. So in our thinking, we are all under a benevolent despotism. The despotism of fact. The strange autocracy of truth. Among ourselves, we may be a democratic people, sharing and sharing alike, and joining in numerous occupations for common betterment. But in nature, we are all under an unalterable design, a complete factuality, and by this we live, and by departing from it we perish. Freedom, therefore, begins, as Aquinas pointed out, not with this desperate effort to cast off law, but with a gentle acceptance of necessities. The individual is free who does not resist that which is needed. In order to experience bondage, we must place ourselves in an unfortunate relationship with nature. We must so conduct our own affairs that law, universal law, becomes opposed to us, not by its intention, but by our intention. Man, therefore, must go out of harmony with life to be afflicted. And the moment he comes against the natural barriers by which life seeks to keep us within a reasonable pattern, man begins to be dissatisfied and talk of slavery, of servitude, of serfdom. He conceives it to be possible that this world and all that it inhabits shall become susceptible to his will, and that he can force nature to any end which he may desire. Nature has played cruel tricks upon people who have tried to do this. It has not always been able to immediately defend itself, particularly on the small level of man's enterprises. But with relentlessness it strikes back. And one by one, man's mistakes lead to natural situations which are his undoing. Probably the greatest example of that has been the development of warfare among men. Nature did not intend this warfare. Universal law does not require it. Men indulge in it. And they not only come to the common grief caused by their own destructiveness, but the price of war is paid not in one generation but in 10. And the unborn future must carry part of the burden of our misdeeds. Nature therefore relentlessly demands that all bills be paid, and all bills which are caused by excessive action must be compensated by a kind of natural repentance by which the individual is brought back again into the proper pattern for man. Philosophy has also affirmed that for each order of life there is a pattern. That this pattern has its origin in the very circumstances and laws by means of which a particular type of life develops in a natural environment. Man is a creature of a special kind. He has certain abilities, certain aptitudes, certain powers and privileges, unique to his own species. He is therefore under the continual necessity of being a man. The moment he falls short, he goes out of harmony with the archetype of his own kind. To betray this archetype is to bring the full vengeance of it down upon his own head. Not because the archetype picks him out and says, I will punish you, but because all punishment is simply the result of inharmonious relationship with truth. The individual, breaking faith with reality, changes this reality into an avenging power. His own conduct is no longer supported by nature, but is constantly attacked by nature. Man is cut off from the proper nutrition of his parts. He deprives himself of the universal strength which is available to him. And the moment he goes contrary to purpose, he goes against the stream of life. And in this way, naturally brings innumerable hardships, disappointments, and disasters upon himself. Philosophically, then, we must think about freedom. We must try to understand what it actually means. Perhaps in one civilization it means that each individual has the inalienable right to be right. This is something he can achieve. He can choose to depart from error. He can choose to keep faith. He can choose to learn and to grow. He can choose to benefit by experience. If he makes choices of such kind, he will in a short time distinguish himself from that majority which makes no choice. He will discover that life offers a variety of opportunities, and that he may make advantage of such opportunities as he chooses to cultivate. And he can enjoy such preferment as he chooses to deserve. Evolution is a twofold procedure. Natural evolution is the long and difficult course of man's motion through an unfolding social environment. Evolution from man is the release of his own humanity, advancement by degrees, passing from one state to another, and leaving that which is outgrown behind. Evolution, however, does not permit anything to advance beyond the state in which its total nature supports its progress. Evolution has no breaks in it, performs no miracles, and in no way selects certain individuals for its special favors or disfavors. Evolution is essential growth of nature, character, temperament, growth of consciousness, unfoldment of body, growth of sensory perceptions and reflective powers. It is true growth. This evolutionary process inevitably moves the great collective, which we call mankind, down the pageantry of history, preparing step by step for the future archetypal state of man, which already rests as a mystery in the divine mind. Evolution also, however, can form a partnership with a thinking human being. Man, becoming aware of evolution, may choose to benefit from his own awareness. He may choose to cooperate with the laws governing himself. He may anticipate certain growth. Not all growth, but perhaps that growth which is next for himself. He may voluntarily keep faith with growth. He may decide that as long as evolution wishes to attain certain ends, he will become the servant of evolution. He will advance its causes, defend its principles, and fit himself to move as rapidly as conditions will permit in the direction of the future goal. In Hermetic philosophy, there is the axiom that art perfects nature. Man can be a useful and faithful servant of those parts of the divine mystery which apply to his own kind and to the immediate environment in which he exists. He may protect the earth in many ways. He may bring forth flowers where weeds have grown. He may supply food. He may explore the mysteries of existence, gaining gradual control over those forms of ignorance by means of which his life has previously been threatened. He may also recognize the particular goals of nature in his own character, how nature is seeking to stimulate natural inquisitiveness, how it is also striving to produce in him patience, tolerance, understanding, cooperation, and innumerable ethical virtues which we all recognize as desirable. Thus man may grow a little faster by working hand in hand with the principle of growth. This is a voluntary allegiance. The end is the same, whether he cooperates or not. But if he does cooperate, a large part of the burden of growth is removed from him. He no longer grows miserably and painfully, with every discovery framed with tragedy. he learns to grow more gloriously, more gently, more graciously, and by degrees develops richness of character, by which most of the sorrows and pains of growth are dissolved, and he can grow as nature really intended him to grow, rejoicing in the fact of continual improvement within himself and learning to live to improve. This is a kind of freedom, the freedom to determine how fast we shall grow. Not to the point of miracle, but to the point of reason. And also to discover those values, that code of life, by which we can accept growth most easily and painlessly. Always remembering that we must accept, and that we have no choice about growing. Our only choice is in how we shall grow. And this choice is part of our pattern of limited determinism. It means that we can do certain things, and through the doing of them, advance the common course of our individual and collective existences. Now, responsibility is a nasty word. Responsibility is to most people the opposite of freedom. Many individuals review it merely in terms of the burdens they have borne and the fact that no matter what they want to do, there is always something interfering, and whenever it seems that pleasure is nigh, duty is nearer or nigher, as they used to say in old times. Responsibility seems to make us feel old. It gives us the sense of the heaviest kind of burden. We view it with alarm as it approaches, and avoid it if possible. That is, unless it is handsomely compensated, then we accept it and neglect it. Responsibility is something that modern man is trying to escape from with every facility at his disposal. We are seeking to escape from the common responsibilities of social relationships. We are more and more burdened by the fact that we have to think about anyone except ourselves. And this turning away from common chores for the gratification of personal desires is a very advanced and sophisticated form of selfishness. We would not like to be considered selfish, but wherever self-centeredness means that we are seeking to gratify our own desires at the expense of others or at the expense of our own character, we are simply self-centered and very foolish. Responsibility is, to our way of thinking, like duty, a kind of slavery which creeps upon us, often without our full awareness, finally entangling us in a net of burdens which seem to prevent us from achieving any of the things that we ourselves want to achieve. Yet responsibility is present everywhere in nature, although in nature it is never presented as duty. Duty, responsibility, burden, all of these pressures arise mostly from the attitude of the individual. Usually, a burden or a responsibility is simply a common incident about which we have built pressureful psychological overtones. Nature does not feel probably any particular responsibility for the change of the seasons, and yet from these changing seasons great benefits are wrought for all kinds of life. Man constantly, however, creates overtones which reduce the directness of labor. He begins to divide things to be done into classifications, things he wants to do and things he should do. And he throws these into the familiar oppositions which we have been considering in this series of talks. Good to him means the things he wants to do. Bad, the things he has to do. And only occasionally do we discover that for the person who has a reasonable interior maturity, the things we want to do and the things we have to do are identical. There's the trick. All you have to do is to work that out in yourself. Now you have to have perhaps a little further assistance, or we will be in a condition of platitudes. Actually, however, the simple procedures of life are nearly all direct, and the things to be done are obvious at the critical moment, becoming less obvious later when the mind goes to work on them. For example, we know many people who complain about a sense of futility. They say that they're getting along fairly well, and then all of a sudden the bottom drops out from under them. Something comes along, dashes their hopes, throws them into a most unfavorable situation, causes them to lose friends, causes family dissensions, results in a general confusion. At the moment at which this confusion occurs, all of the facts are available. The idea of the individual who says that he doesn't understand and does not know why it should happen to him, usually this is not true. It is simply a defense, a way of trying to maintain face, to protect ourselves from a reasonable and proper criticism. I have talked to a great many persons through the years who came to impasses of one kind or another, or went through extremely critical situations. When you get down and get underneath the defense mechanism, and they really tell the truth, most of them will admit that at the time they got themselves into trouble, they knew they were doing wrong. The only thing was they hoped to get away with it. They hoped no one else would notice, especially that universal law would not notice. Well, other folks might not notice. And universal law certainly did not turn a telescope on them. But in the process of doing that which is not right, the individual had to take universal energy and use it wrong. The answer was trouble. The energy contained its retribution in itself, and from this there is no escape. Energy misused turns into an avenging demon and comes back to the individual who misused it. He knows this. If, in the primitive emergencies of living, the individual finds himself in a critical state for which his knowledge is essentially not sufficient, then nature again has done him a larger favor than he knows. First of all, nature has told him through one incident that he was ignorant. that he was below the level of his own need. Nature simply told him in a forceful and direct manner that if he wanted to survive, he had to learn more. He had to find the answer to the pressures which were annihilating him. At the moment also, nature nearly always shows the answer, for the very reason that the emergency has the answer locked in it. The next day, the person, if he is honest, can say, well, if I had done it this way instead of that way, this situation would never have arisen. He has discovered something, if he is willing to accept it and remember it. However, in many instances, he locks his own mind to these discoveries. He becomes so addicted to his own opinions and allows false prejudices to so completely dominate his attitudes that he simply willfully and intentionally rejects facts in favor of his own opinions. Of course, he can do this, but he must pay the bill. Regardless of what we do that is not right, we must pay the bill. The responsibility for personal conduct thus looms large among the burdens of the race. Responsibility also to learn from experience. We are responsible to ourselves for what we learn from what happens to us. Experience is the great school, the most important school of all. Here we come face to face with the great lessons. We either accept them or reject them. We reject, however, very curiously in some cases. Very few people will come out and say, this is obviously true, therefore I won't accept it. Such thinking they cannot live with. But they will take a situation which they should think through honestly and bring to play upon it so many intellectual conceits, so many emotional dishonesties, that they can gradually convince themselves that someone else is wrong and is responsible for their trouble. This takes a long and complicated pattern of false knowledge. And most of our knowledge today is just sufficiently false so that it protects us in our mistakes, protects our opinions, but not our lives. In final figuring, our great responsibility, of course, is to grow and solve the problem that afflicted us yesterday. We must be bigger than yesterday. And to do this, we must make a project out of growth through experience. To gain this growth through experience, the richest life is the life with the most experience. The protected person who runs away from challenge and tries to maintain himself yesterday, today, and forever on the same level is betraying himself. He is trying to stand still in a moving world. He is trying to be his own yesterdays in a world that demands that he prepares for tomorrow. All locked lives, and lives are most seriously locked by opinions. All lives that have not in them the capacity for immediate adjustment to essential growth. All such limited lives will be subject to greater pain greater tragedy than such lives as grow naturally and accept living naturally. For this reason, perhaps, children pass successfully through many disasters that adults cannot face. A child in an accident is less likely to be injured than an adult, simply because the child is without fear or without those tensions by which the adult locks himself in a most vulnerable state of consciousness. Everywhere in nature, that growth which is natural is the least painful and the most important. But also, always and ever in this growing procedure, we must recognize the importance of having things happen. The most impoverished life is the one which does not encourage happenings. Now, why do we not encourage a rich experience life? Well, there are many possible answers to this, and none of them any good. One of the commonest of these answers is that we are self-conscious. We do not like to expose ourselves to the possible ridicule of other people. We do not like to endanger the little world of our own opinions by exposing it to the larger world of other folks' opinions, or the still larger world of facts as they are. I have known hundreds of persons who have succeeded in living for 50, 60, 70, or even 80 years in an imaginary universe. By the time they've lived there for 40 or 50 years, this imaginary universe has become so real that there is no likelihood that they will ever be able to escape from it in this life. In fact, an effort to escape might result in death, just as the canary bird that has lived all its life in the cage, finding the door open one day, gets out, only to be eaten by the family cat. The bird has no way to protect itself when it is free from the cage. A person who has lived within a cage of his own making lacks the power to protect himself in a larger world. Therefore he runs away from it, and in emergency goes back to the cage again. In so doing, he runs away from freedom and goes back into slavery. But he goes to slavery because slavery protects him, and freedom presents him with a challenge for which he has no experience. Each one of us, therefore, should assiduously cultivate experiences. We should do many things. We should exchange ideas with many people. We should, with open minds and hearts, investigate all matters of importance and significance. When we permit prejudice to limit our perspective, we are a slave of prejudice. When we permit intolerance to divide us, we are a slave of intolerance. Any habit which causes us to be less than ourselves is an autocrat, a tyrant, a despot, distorting our perspectives and making life difficult for us. By accepting responsibilities which take us out into a world of constant challenge, we also strengthen our faculties of ingenuity and adjustment. It is only under challenge that we draw upon our own resources to the fullest degree. And by drawing upon our own resources as much as we can, we advance our own evolutionary procedure. Nature is seeking to reveal and release the potentials of living creatures. if we make it our particular job to release our own potential, then we move with nature. In fact, anticipate nature. And through this partnership, we gain a great strength from nature and from natural laws. The moment we stop, the moment we crystallize, the moment we become fixed in anything, we lose this power to grow. And we become like a rock in the middle of a stream. The water will appear to break and go around us, but ultimately the water will wear away that rock. Everywhere in nature, it has been my observation that there is a curious penalty upon the individual who tries to stand still. Standing still on a planet moving as rapidly as ours does is a rather dizzy situation at best. Nothing stands still. The person who tries to, the one who says to the passing hour, "Oh, stay, thou art so fair," is really locking himself in a situation that will ultimately become his prison. We think of responsibilities as prisons, but they are only imprisonment when we continue to accept them without attempting to improve our own relationship toward them. A responsibility is an open problem, asking us to solve it, asking us to find the best and most correct way of bringing to a reasonable and proper termination our duty to something else. Nature wants us to work through responsibilities and to take out of them forever this heavy, negative sadness which we develop at the very thought that some part of our time or energy must be used for something beside our own whims. Nature is helping us to use every relationship in life to understand life. And wherever a relationship becomes unreasonable or unpleasant or unprofitable to our larger pattern of living, we have done something wrong. It is not enough to assume that the situation itself is impossible. It is not impossible. It simply is a challenge. And it seems impossible because we do not wish to bestow upon that challenge a proper amount of energy or a proper amount of thoughtfulness. Perhaps in the review of the situation, we discover that we do not know a full and proper solution. This in itself is a discovery which should end our smugness forever. The moment nature reveals to us that we are inadequate, we should solemnly resolve to attain adequacy. Nature has come up to us as a friend and said, "Look, you're not doing this right. Why not?" And we may say, "Well, I don't know any better." Then nature says, "You'd better find out, because I'll return the lesson again next week, and with a little more pressure 2 weeks from now. And unless you begin to get the answer, you're going to have trouble. Because if necessary, nature will send that problem back 10,000 times. And an individual who has to face the same problem 10,000 times is just a fool. First time it can be anybody's fault. Second time it's his. If in the face of a need, he does not roll up his sleeves and fit himself to meet that need, he has no reason to complain against life. To meet the need, he may have to think. He may have to study. He may have to perfect himself in some particular and special kind of knowledge. But that's why he's here. He is not here merely for the purpose of enjoying the static state of life. 1,000 years from now, another kind of humanity will look back upon these days and say, well, the people back there thought they were the good old days. We think they were pretty bad. They will look back and they will say, just look how foolish people were 1,000 years ago. We do that now. They will do it then. They will wonder how we could have been so stupid in the presence of such splendid opportunities to be intelligent. But today, being intelligent seems like too much trouble. It interferes with the delightful procedure of being unintelligent. But if this interferes, the consequence of our own unintelligence interferes more. So what do we have? We have the highest rate mental breakdown in history. We have more broken homes than our ancestors would have been able to contemplate. Juvenile delinquency is a shame. We go on our way, simply declining to learn, on the grounds that to be forced to learn is autocracy. We are a free people, and freedom means to be foolish as long as we can get away with it. These things we do not say, but this is the way we act, and actions speak louder than words. In the pressure or presence of any difficult situation, the person knows better than he does, and he's got to begin to close that gap. I was talking to someone not long ago, and they were telling about a little trouble they had. Said, well, after all, I should have been patient. I know I should have been patient. But at that moment, I didn't feel like being patient, so I wasn't. This is rather common and extremely childish, but there seems to be no answer to it. For at that moment, all the wisdom in the world that surrounds us was of no immediate help. We felt like being impatient, so we were. Man, therefore, has come all this way, and a great percentage of mankind has learned to play the piano, the bass viol, or the piccolo. A long and difficult task. But they have not been able to discipline themselves in their own conduct. A man can go out and die for his beliefs, but he cannot come home and live according to them. The long, patient labor of life corrodes and corrupts our best resolutions. We fall back in the old accustomed negative patterns. The thought of doing something about it forces this sense of responsibility, and I think in most cases, responsibility has become a burden because we have falsely estimated the ends which it is supposed to achieve. When we have performed a duty, we think of ourselves as sacrificing our own lives for other people. Actually, we are sacrificing our own mistakes for our own good. The other person is simply our glorious opportunity to improve ourselves. The most miserable people under burdens that I know are the ones who firmly believe they exist only to be pawns on the checkerboard or chessboard played by someone else. They sincerely believe that duty is bondage to the pleasures, whims, and attitudes of others. Therefore, that it is basically unfair. And if this was true, if this was nature's way, it would be unfair. But how many persons in this emergency try to justify nature, try to prove that nature is not a despot, not a tyrant, but an ever-watchful guide, an ever-kindly nurse of man's needs. Actually, every time we serve another, we serve mostly ourselves. For we gain certain interior advantage, far in excess of the material good that we can confer. Lives are not impoverished by responsibilities unless we regard these responsibilities as disasters and get good and sorry for ourselves. Responsibilities should therefore not be necessarily avoided. But we do not go very far along this line of procedure before we discover that it is all not as simple as this, that there are some complicating factors intruding themselves continuously. We discover that while we are trying to be dutiful, that we are trying to shoulder responsibilities, someone else comes along and imposes on us. We come to the discouraging discovery that all of our well-laid endeavors are not appreciated. Or we may even go further and discover that all the service we have rendered has made the other person worse. This generally stops us for a moment, if we ever discover it. But we generally conclude the other person got worse of their own accord. We don't assume that we had any part in it. Actually, this problem of responsibility and duty demands special training. Everything in life demands special training. That demands bondage. That demands sacrifice of time and effort. Anything that is worth doing must be done well, and that means it must be done expertly. So responsibility and duty both demand insight. They both demand understanding and a clear ability to perceive that which is good, or that which is necessary, or that which is desirable. Now let us assume for a moment that many persons will have to perform responsibilities and duties who simply do not possess the insight to make these adjustments. All they can do is the best they can from day to day. Are they going to be penalized? No, not in the same way that an individual will be penalized who could do better. Because for them, their inadequacy, their lack of knowledge, makes possible the continuous enlargement of knowledge. They have to learn this way. They will make mistakes, but if these mistakes are made with a good spirit and a proper dedication to principles, there is a wonderful strength that is available where sincerity dominates the situation. Very few persons who are sincere really suffer from the responsibilities under which they are placed. If with this sincerity there is simple open-mindedness, just a desire to grow, each step of the responsibility means increasing ability to meet it. Everyone must outgrow his responsibilities, but he cannot walk out on them. He can reach a condition in which he can solve them, put the patterns as they should be, and in so doing solve the situation for himself and others. Until then, he must carry them. But if he does not grow while he carries them, he will never reach victory. If he does not permit himself to learn or encourage himself to become master of a situation, he will be the servant of it forever. Even change of life from one incarnation to another will not remove him from a duty which he has not learned to complete. He must achieve completeness. must outgrow the task. The moment he does, it no longer exists. For our whole problem of burden and task has to do with what we have not outgrown. We are not as yet able to handle the situation. That is why it is a duty and why it is a responsibility. When we have handled it adequately, it fades away. Then we have the 2 points now that we have created in our living, this terrible contrast between doing as we like, which is freedom, doing with what we should, which is the acceptance of responsibility in life. Actually, we get 2 or 3 weeks of vacation a year. Those weeks are of tremendous importance to us because they are a contrast to labor. The individual who never works can never have a vacation. That's one of the great things he loses. He can never have the pleasure of freedom, temporary freedom, from routine or organized living. In our modern way of life, we all have a tendency to rebel against routine. This is one of the unkindest of all our responsibilities. Yet routine is without question one of the most important disciplines that we know. It is the only discipline that many people will ever have. It is the discipline of necessity imposed upon conduct. Routine, when accepted and worked through, loses all its offense to us. It becomes a perfectly acceptable situation. Actually, when you tell this to some individual, he will say, perhaps, yes, it can become a routine, can become acceptable. The individual just simply dies, and then he doesn't care anymore. That's one answer to the problem of routine. This is not the real answer, however. The individual who dies under routine would have died anywhere else. You do not die by understanding your way through an orderly procedure of life. You examine routine. You analyze its importance to you. And by degrees, instead of dying under it, you discover the challenge of it. You realize how tremendously it symbolizes law and order. And how moving this experience of orderly procedure into yourself, you become capable of a degree of achievement otherwise utterly impossible. And the person with routine, well set in his nature, if suddenly moved into a larger world, and having greater freedoms than he previously enjoyed, will handle them far more wisely than an individual who has not had routine. There is an old saying that very few persons make good executives who have not first worked their way up. Man does not make a good executive in nature until he has worked his way upward through all of the lesser positions which he could occupy. He is always hoping that he will be promoted suddenly. He isn't. And a man promoted too suddenly finds his promotion the heaviest burden that he ever had to bear, because he is not equipped for it. Equipment in man has some bearing upon the problem of routine. We all hear of Eastern disciplines of meditation and ancient practices like the contemplative exercises of Pythagoras. We learn that in these ancient schools, man was taught to control his own mind and to control his own life and to put his conduct under the control and direction of an ordered procedure. Routine has become almost the meditative exercise of Western man. It is about the only pattern by means of which he is forced to do things he does not want to do. He will either break under this through constant dissatisfaction and rebellion, or he will gradually come to recognize that routine puts his own life in order, helps him to be a better thinker, helps him to understand value as he could never otherwise understand it. And when he leaves his labors and goes into the things he wants to do, he does them more thoroughly and in a more orderly way, because he has learned orderly procedure. Order, of course, is a very serious detriment to the individual who regards it as bondage. But order is not bondage, it is merely efficiency. And efficiency is as valuable in the inner life of man as it is in business or industry. In fact, more valuable, because the situations are more important. Thus, everything that happens outside of ourselves has a direct relationship to our inner lives. And through the acceptance, the wise acceptance of the everyday, we gain a powerful insight into the development and perfection of our own characters. For this reason, the ancients truly believed that life was an initiation into the mysteries. And all the symbolisms of initiation are based upon the pageantry of man's existence from the cradle to the grave. In this respect, then, responsibility is freedom, strangely enough, and freedom is responsibility. The slave can do no more than the master permits. The free man can do more, not less. The individual who accepts his freedom accepts the responsibility for the advancement and preservation of his own destiny. He says to himself, I will stand on my own feet. I will lean on no one. I will depend upon no one. I will share gladly, but I will not expect anyone to do anything. The moment we take this position, we see that we have gained with our freedom a terrible aloneness. We are forced to make all the decisions for ourselves. We must feed and clothe not only our bodies but our souls. Anything that goes wrong, we must accept the blame. Any problem that appears difficult, we must solve by ourselves. Freedom is therefore the individual assuming the full responsibility for his own conduct. So he is becoming more responsible and has a heavier and more difficult job than he ever had before. As long as we interpret freedom merely as release from responsibility, we are going along the haphazard way which is leading us now into the worst emergency we have ever known. There is no freedom that can be without responsibility. And license or abandon cannot be regarded as true freedom. Responsibility, on the other hand, can lead in itself or be in itself a very subtle kind of freedom. For example, responsibility frees us from indecision. It no longer means that we must make constant and immediate decisions. A job is at hand. This job we accept. And because it is our job, the acceptance of this makes it unnecessary for it to accept another or a dozen others. Responsibility, therefore, centers our lives, stops our wanderings, fastens us to purposes, and decrees that our immediate growth is planned for us in a strange and wonderful way. How shall we know what responsibilities are ours? There are two attitudes and two schools of thought on this. One school says if we go out and look for enough of them, we'll find them. And in this way we can make ourselves responsible for the whole world if we so desire. But the burden is a little too large for us. There is another school that says that there is a strange law and fatality that governs these things, and that which is our own will come to us, as Walt Whitman says. In other words, the problem that sits on our doorstep is our problem. We don't have to go out looking for one. In the course of normal life, certain problems come to us. We do not know what brings them. We assume it's somebody else. Actually, however, this drawing of a problem is like attracting like. That which is next appears. And while it may be clothed in a service to another, the problem that comes to us is the one we must accept. If this problem is 3 children born to our family, this is our problem, our responsibility, our job, and our privilege. If it is a stranger who falls faint upon our doorstep, if he falls on our doorstep, he is ours. And we must solve his problem or work with him to assist him to find his own solution. Thus, responsibilities are those things which in the natural and normal course of action are our own. In this kind of thinking, we do find another little trick of the human mind, and that is the tendency to figure that other people's responsibilities are more pleasant than ours. Therefore, that we will not pay any attention to the man on our doorstep, but will rush down the street to take care of a handsomer man on somebody else's doorstep. We do not like our problem, but we know a friend who has one that we can handle very well. We also have another type of escape which is quite delightful, and that is not being able to handle any one problem. We decide to handle 100 at once. That seems to simplify things tremendously. We do not know what we are doing, so let's not worry about 1 or 2 people. Let's save the whole world while we're at it. The advantage, of course, of moving into an utterly impossible problem is that we can fail with dignity, because we had no chance of success in the first place. Our friends will fully understand why we cannot convert the rest of the world. But they might look a little askance if we haven't been able to make any impression on our own relatives. They admit that we couldn't prevent a war in China, but what about the delinquency of our own children? So it is nice to point out that we are busy with the war in China. Therefore, haven't quite time enough to take care of the other little details. Of course, we're just fooling ourselves. It is simply our way of running away from a situation. Let us always remember that nature's way of teaching is very simple. We begin with the smallest and the nearest. Solve that and move on. We never jump over the problem on our own doorstep. We never try to evade it. For the solutional development of man's consciousness moves from lesser to greater, from one to many. And we can never advance safely except that we advance along a path of attained solutions. Any evasion will come back in time. Any problem not solved is a weakness in our armor, even though we may hurry past it and solve a dozen others. Actually, our growth is always to do the next thing next, and from there pass on to another next, which immediately appears over the horizon. By slowly and inevitably progressing from solution to solution, we make real progress. By evasion, we make no progress at all. And in failing to make the immediate adjustments, we are unable to move on to larger and more important assignments. Knowing, therefore, that the job as yet unfinished is the one to work on first, we have to analyze its demands and operate according to these reasonable needs. The challenge is continuously the same, that in some way, some part of our understanding is not adequate. Also, we come face to face with the difference between theory and practice. We become profoundly amazed at how nobly we can think and foolishly we can act. And we may sometimes be surprised at the nobility of the action of a person apparently foolish. We discover that many comparatively simple and unlettered individuals, simply by the practical value which they have in themselves, achieve where a person of greater attainments does not achieve. We learn from this a very important truth for ourselves. The importance of action or conduct being always simple and direct. Much action is to conceal ignorance rather than to reveal wisdom. Things known and properly integrated within ourselves move simply, naturally, and directly. Wherever there is confusion, there is inadequacy. Wherever there is complication, there is lack of ability to direct action. So very often the simple person with a simple idea meets the simple need and the problem is solved. To work toward this simplicity is therefore an essential part of man's solution of his great problem in life. Recognizing from this and from other related things that come up as he goes along, that he must proceed by simple and direct means. He knows that he must build in himself a reserve of knowledge. He must devote some part of his living time to getting hold of the instruments of the human craft or trade. He cannot become more efficient and valuable in his conduct unless he releases more and more of his own potential. He is only as valuable as his character permits him to be, and his character depends upon his own voluntary dedication to growing up. How then shall he learn? Shall he tie himself back again into the old patterns of education? Not necessarily. He learns in nature by an apprenticeship system. He learns by doing. That is the reason why it is so important that he considers his own action. It is a great mistake to act so quickly that we rush away without ever seeing the consequences of what we have done. Pause and reflect. Give the opportunity to yourself to study with care and honesty the consequence of every decision that you make, every intention which you carry out, every doctrine which you affirm. test these things and abide by the consequence of the test and not by the authority of tradition. If you learn this way, step by step, you will find that you can combine abstract knowledge with these disciplines to general advantage of all concerned. The abstract knowledge in itself is not enough. It is a loading of the mind with thoughts, but these thoughts do not crystallize into immediate improvement in conduct. If then experience is a measuring of conduct, then by experience through conduct, theories become facts. Things talked about become experienced. And experience is the only authority which man inside of himself cannot deny. He can deny the words of others, but he cannot deny that which occurs to his own flesh. He must face it and accept it. In our modern world, where the general tendency today is increasing desire for freedom, there is a strong tendency to undermine the common teamwork upon which the future of society depends. Humanity is one team of beings. And while we do not affirm with us the socialistic program that the individual is created only for the preservation of the group, I think we have to recognize, in fairness, honor, and integrity, that we are a team, and that if we fail the other members of the team, we commit an action of common detriment to us all. One of the great problems in teamwork is the ability to catch a thrown ball. In a game, the person throwing the ball must depend upon the man who catches it. And in life, we are constantly having certain kinds of balls thrown at us. And we must catch them. If we fail, we fall down on the whole team. Something goes essentially wrong with the entire pattern of life. Therefore, when in the course of living, a situation is tossed to us, we must catch it, and we must do something about it. And what we do must be as nearly right as possible. In athletics, we would not set a team of totally unpracticed, inexperienced players out against a strong team. There must be practice. There must be the gradual development of coordination and a kind of subtle obedience that is not a frustration of individuality, but means dependability. Today we are not catching very many of the balls that are thrown to us by the emergencies of life. We do not want to play with the team. We want to stand all by ourselves and take the applause. And this sense that teamwork detracts from individuality is a mistake. Our individuality is inevitable, but it is also something gradually developing. We talk now of our desperate desire to be individuals, and yet to what degree are we? We're individuals largely by our own opinion only. How can we say that people are individuals when they move by herd instinct to practically every fantasy that is propaganded? How can we say that we are individuals when 50 million women in the United States are led around by the nose by Parisian dress designers and will wear utter abominations rather than be out of style? How can we look at 500 smartly dressed men, all of whom look identical, and talk about individuality? And yet these individuals would not dare to be seen with the wrong kind of a shirt. We are slaves of tradition. We are slaves of conventions. Perhaps our so-called individuality finds its largest expression in the fact that we can have different colored automobiles. Or break all rules and have a red Frigidaire. This is really a dynamic statement that we are free people. Yet we are constantly moving by mass opinion. The press makes up our minds. Television makes up our morals. If we do not like any of these things, we grumble and do nothing. We are not individuals in the way we think we are. Yet each of us has a sense within himself that he is a potential individual. He believes that there is something in him which gives him the right to be himself. But he is usually contented to have this thought and sit back in the pleasant contemplation of it. It isn't necessary to prove it. He'll just accept it on its own grounds. Actually, individuality, in the way we think of it, the right of individual distinction, the right to make a superior contribution to the common good, this type of individuality belongs mostly with the utopias and other hopeful dreams of man. It can only come to man after he has passed through the great cycle of duty, responsibility, and burden. Individuality belongs to the maturity of man. The desperate search for liberties belongs to the immaturity of man. The mature person, as far as his own life and thinking is concerned, is not nearly as interested in being free as he is interested in being useful. For to him, freedom is the right to be useful. And for this, he will fight with every available resource that he has. Individuality is not proven by doing as we please, because the records and statistics gathered from the individuals who do as they please prove that they're all doing the same things. Consequently, freedom is the right to be like everybody else in certain ways. The right to all their enjoyments and freedom from all their burdens. It just doesn't work out very well on paper, or you can't make a good diagram of it, but it sounds impressive. Responsibility, as contrasted to freedom now, as to its advantages, offers a number of things that are rather interesting and worthwhile. Responsibility is our right to do things that are valuable. It is our right to be useful, to be significant to others. And it is our right to so conduct ourselves that we have a certain proper and reasonable pride in our own conduct. Responsibility gives us the privilege of expressing our freedom by voluntary acceptance of things needed and a gradually increasing skill in the things that we do. Freedom leading to idleness is of no merit to us and of very little interest. The individual must be busy. He must be doing things. He is therefore continually a servant of his own instinct to create. Unless he is creating, unless he is contributing, he is not happy. Consequently, freedom from work can never bring happiness, because man likes to work. The only trouble is that he doesn't like the particular work he's doing. He always wants a little different type of job. This is proper. But in order to do other kinds of work, he must equip himself for it. This challenges him. And this challenge is the basis of his gradual determination to so improve his knowledge that he can have the job which he wants. All these things move under a lawful pattern, and when so envisioned, they make a good life, a life of common sense and adequate achievement. We have other freedoms that we greatly value. Freedom of religious belief, the right to believe according to the conviction of conscience. This is a good freedom. It's better, however, if the conviction of conscience is a little better. The right to believe is also the right to grow in believing. It is the right to believe something better than may be generally believed. It is also the right to discriminate and to choose those beliefs which appear to be most suitable to our own maturity. Freedom of religion is more than the tolerance for religious groups. Freedom of religion is the right of man to search for God and to gradually find these means which are most suitable. And as he must outgrow other factors in life, so he generally has to outgrow beliefs, moving from one to another. He is free to change, but he is not free of belief until he transcends believing by knowledge or by conscious attainment of the end of religion, which is the experience of truth. Man is therefore never free until the end. He is not free in the beginning because he hasn't the equipment for freedom. To have, therefore, people in our middle stream of evolution talking about freedom is merely to talk about certain aspects, partial forms of liberty. Certain liberties assured by legislation. Certain liberties maintained by common conventions, by treaties, pacts, and leagues. Real freedom must be freedom from ignorance, freedom from the limitation of our own imperfection. This comes at the end. And as the Eastern philosophers have so often noted in some of their wisest works, by the time we have attained to true freedom, we've forgotten we wanted it. Freedom is therefore the desperate urge for a liberty that we do not have. And when we achieve the point where this liberty is available, when our whole consciousness is so integrated that we could rise on our feet and lift our hands to heaven and say, I am free, by that time the instinct has changed. And instead of doing this, we suddenly fall on our knees, bend our heads in prayer, and say, God, I am thy servant. We haven't any more interest in freedom, because freedom has something to do with lawlessness in most of our habits and so forth. Freedom means that we can do some little things we shouldn't do, and no one's going to catch us or blame us. Freedom is the right to our own peculiar kind of ignorance, and we demand that other people respect it. And if we respect theirs, there is a mutual situation that is difficult to solve any more than that, to that degree. But actually, freedom in the end is the acceptance of all responsibility. And the full acceptance of responsibility and the full acknowledgement of our dependence upon life. This ends in a wonderful kind of freedom. Man attains freedom from the worst of all slave masters, and that's his own ego. And while he is pushed around by pride, while he is the servant of his own determinations, ambitions, and requirements, he can never be free. But when in the renunciation of these things he gives up his desires, he suddenly discovers freedom from desire. Freedom not through gratification, but through the transmutation of the desire itself. Freedom from the lesser because the lesser ceases to be, not because we have found some strange way of eluding it or evading it. Responsibility is the pleasant and natural life of the mature adult. He wants it. He chooses it. It is his freedom. He wishes to be placed under some challenge, by means of which his usefulness will increase, his knowledge will enlarge, and his whole character will improve. If he has the choice, he will choose this. Even as an adult may also choose to continue his education, giving up his spare time to gain some knowledge that he has suddenly learned to need, something that becomes important. So all freedom is absorbed the moment we become aware of values and become conscious of that which is important. So we can give away our freedom very easily. We all give it away in 100 devices and do not regret them at all. The individual who goes in debt is voluntarily giving away his freedom. He is coming under the heavy taskmaster of usury. The individual who takes on the natural responsibilities of parenthood is sacrificing his freedom. And yet most normal persons will not hesitate in this decision. The desire for fullness of responsibility and expression is far more deep than this love of liberty we talk about. The young person knows that if he builds a home, he must support a family. Yet for him, this is a better way of life than not to build a home, not support a family, and be free. Nature does not support him in this instinct to freedom. Rather, it supports him in the sacrifice of his own freedom to achieve useful ends. This desire, therefore, that we call freedom is only valid when it means freedom from the false values by means of which we distort, prevent the natural unfolding of maturity in ourselves. Yet maturity, which brings with it responsibility, is not an evil state to be feared. It brings with it certain advantages also. It brings us certain liberties that children do not have. It brings us the power of leadership, the right to establish family, to make valuable and important decisions, and to advance our careers according to the laws and conditions of our times. Thus, maturity with its responsibilities is a more valid state than immaturity without responsibility. Actually, the reason why childhood has no responsibility as the adult understands it is because of the intricate structure of man's psychophysical constitution. The energies required for mature decision are too heavy a drain upon the growing physical body of the young child. So nature locks certain pressures, releasing them gradually. And if the child takes on responsibilities prematurely, he will probably suffer keenly as a result. But if, on the other hand, having attained maturity, he rejects responsibility, he will also suffer. For there are attitudes and conditions proper and appropriate to every period in life. Actually, there is no line between freedom and responsibility. Many persons have found their greatest freedom in responsibility, and have found freedom their greatest responsibility. These things are relative terms made by man, and every one of them is subject to the pressure of his own thought and emotion. If his emotion rejects freedom, freedom is unimportant. If his mind rejects responsibility, responsibility is considered as a detriment. What the mind accepts, the heart accepts, these become values, and our patent attitudes, our clear-cut rationalizations disappear the moment life itself begins to live itself through us. All of these formulas, these opinions, these conceits, these arbitrary standards dissolve in the factual problems of living. As we live more adequately, we probably look forward to certain kinds of freedom. We look forward to age, freeing us from certain intemperances of youth. The busy man who has worked a long lifetime looks forward to the pleasant years of retirement, when he will be free to do some of the things that he wants to do. But if he hasn't made new responsibilities for himself, he will die a week after he is free, because he cannot endure his own freedom. Therefore, what does he do? He merely changes a taskmaster. Instead of going to the office every morning, he builds a shop in his basement and works all day. He has to. Because freedom is not the kind of thing that he can easily accept. The nearest thing to freedom that the wise man probably knows is the freedom that comes to him through internal contemplation. By means of the development of his own consciousness, he is able to free his own inward life, temporarily at least, from the encroachments of false value, centered within his own consciousness, aware of his own relationship to the divine and the universal. Through the suspension of the attributes of his own objective mind and emotions, he attains a kind of tranquility. This tranquility is a lawful kind of freedom, if it is not abused. It is the restoration of his own universality. It is the removal of bounds and boundaries. It is the individual living in a boundless expanse of value. And in this tremendous sense of unity with life comes a magnificent sense of freedom. But even as this sense of freedom envelops us, and we say to ourselves, at last, I have escaped from the bondage of the temporal and the ephemeral. Even as this mood, perhaps for an instant, seems to be valid, this same contemplation carries us into a universe of absolute rules, of absolute values, and we suddenly discover that we are a fragment of a pattern so vast, so inevitable, and so ultimately good and useful, that we are satisfied and honored merely to recognize that we are this fragment, that there is no longer any question. Freedom is not nearly as interesting as we thought. Rather now is motion. Motion in harmony with reality. The individual seeking no longer freedom, but assuming the full burden of reality. The journey home, the return to reality. is to return to the perfect relationship between the part and the totality. Immediately, great laws and purposes set in, and we are content, because these laws are our hope, our strength, and our salvation. And obedience to these laws is to us no loss of freedom, but attainment of freedom from error. We are therefore indifferent as to whether we are free to do as we please or not, because we have now only one desire, and that is to do what truth pleases that we should do. Thus the opposites are reconciled, and in the life of truthfulness, in the life of truth-seeking, in the life of inner inspiration releasing, responsibility, freedom, cease to be polarities at all. They are enveloped in a larger pattern. All opposites are reconciled into the simple fact that there is one law, one life, and one path, and that we are all in various ways moving upon it. One moment this law and path and way seems to be broad and offer freedom. In another moment it seems to be narrow and force bondage. But it is the same path. It is the same road. It is the same law. And as we understand it better, we see that bondage and freedom are merely aspects of it, but that the law in its total expression is eternal good moving for the purposes of itself. We are part of this. We move with it. And when we become conscious of our identity with reality, there is no longer liberty or burden. There is simply the continuing and inevitable resolution to fulfill the law, to return to it, to be one with it, and to find both liberty and obedience in that which is great enough to enclose them both, and to find in our experience of full consciousness all polarities and all opposites dissolved in wisdom, love, and truth. As we experience this, even in a small way here in this world, we gain a new courage to face these oppositions, these contraries, and these contrasts, without continuing to think of them as opposites, but rather as phases and the unfoldment of one great principle. Well, time's up.